Hi, and welcome to a special edition of SpectrumCast. Today we're continuing our Modern Data Protection series with a focus this week on a journey to cloud. But not just any application. We're focused on the data protection journey to the cloud. This week we have a special guest, Cyrus Niltchian, and along with Randy, Tricia, and Sean, we're going to talk about this journey. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of SpectrumCast. I am here with my co-host, Randy Arseneau. Hey, Randy.
Hi, Steve.
And as always, we have Tricia and Sean here with us. And this week, we have a special guest, Cyrus, and I'm going to hope I don't get this wrong, Niltchian? All right, Cyrus?
Cyrus is good. Cyrus is good.
Thank you, Steve. We'll stick with Cyrus.
Stick with first names. Yeah.
So today we're going to be talking a little bit about the evolution and the journey to cloud, specifically when it comes around data protection and backup and resiliency. So I think we all know, and because it's been the easiest kind of application to drive data to the cloud, that data protection is the number one application filling up or consuming cloud devices. So if the cloud folks are looking to fill up their capacity to be able to charge clients, data protection is pretty easy. Data protection is typically not considered a production application. So if there's a little bit of a mess up, it's not like it's mission critical information at the moment. So it's a kind of an easy application to choose as your first on your journey to cloud. IBM's data protection solutions leverage the cloud in multiple different ways. We leverage it as running the server in the cloud. You can run or back up to the cloud, or we have solutions that can actually back up applications that are in the cloud. So all we want to do is take a little bit of time here and talk about that journey that clients may be having in moving to the cloud, and what does that mean for them, and maybe how should they be thinking about that journey to the cloud, specifically when it comes to the data protection environment. So maybe we start with Sean. Sean, what are you hearing from clients out there specifically around cloud adoption when thinking about data protection?
Well, for me, I think, the cloud is and has been the hottest subject for the past 3 years, right? I mean, everybody wants to be on the cloud. If you listen to the marketing, right, it's all they talk about is cloud, cloud, cloud. And I guess the first comment I would make is, there's many different aspects, as you just pointed out, to being on the cloud. Are we talking about just storing data there and using cloud technologies to store the data? Are we talking about moving workload to the cloud? Or are we talking about data protection in the cloud, right? So, because it's very different things.
Or data protection as a service in the cloud. I'd add that to it.
Service in the cloud. And I guess the other thing I would just point out, just to kind of kick this conversation off, and I know Cyrus is going to share a lot of information about journey to the cloud and getting there. I think if you listen to the marketing, right, you will kind of feel like, man, if you're in an enterprise, you should be kind of your on-premise solution is old and passe and bad and not the ideal solution, and you should be like totally moved off of it by now. And I guess my experience is in working with many customers and talking to many customers, many of them are not there yet. Right? They are kind of thinking about how they're going to achieve this. They're thinking about the use cases that are good for the cloud and maybe the use cases that are good to remain on premise, right? And I think the answer is usually some sort of hybrid solution between those two.
Yeah, interestingly enough, the call I got off just prior to this was with one of our financial services markets seller leaders. And in that space, as you can probably imagine, the vast majority of their core workloads are still on premises. I mean, they're not, for a bunch of reasons, sovereignty, security, access control. They're running their mission critical workloads on prem, and they will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. So it's a good point. I mean, obviously the cloud is very attractive for some workloads, and some industry segments, but there are others for which it is, at least for the time being anyway. I wouldn't say it's a non-starter, but it's much less attractive for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, would like to I couldn't agree more. What we see these board level initiatives to move everything to the cloud. So big push towards cloud, and I think IBM's strength is that we are coming from an on-prem world. We have rock solid solutions in the on-prem world, but not everything should go to the cloud, or not every use case is really a 100% cloud use case. Therefore, we have kind of defined, or we see that we see our customers being on a journey. So they come from an on-prem world. Some of them are already hybrid, meaning they have adopted cloud to a certain extent, and some of them are already in the cloud 80-90%. So what we observe out there in the field from our customers is that they are really on a journey. They are a journey to the cloud, but that does not mean that necessarily every use case makes sense to be in the cloud. And we as IBM, we have a managed services around data protection, around disaster recovery, around cloud orchestration, including a strong proposition around cyber incident recovery. So the ability to recover from a cyber attack quickly. So we have these capabilities. We offer them as software, so you can kind of buy this off the shelf. But we also offer this as part of a managed service, so we can offer managed services around that. Fully managed services, including implementation, steady state, hardware, software, everything that belongs to a fully managed service. So I think the point I'm trying to make is that we see a journey to the cloud happening, and we as IBM, we can help at every step of the way.
And I think just hearing Cyrus's talk about the different offerings and attention to what gets moved out there, this is a big consideration, and you really have to step back and look at what's going on in your organization and what type of data you can move out there. Because if it is just going to be disaster recovery, then is it going to provide the speeds and feeds you need in case of a disaster? And how is that cloud being protected? So if there's some type of virus that hits not only your IT center, but the IT centers hosting those clouds, how are they protecting it? So I also feel that you really got to step back and say, okay, cloud has a lot of advantages, but you got to put them into perspective.
Yeah, let's take both of those angles, because I like the way you set that up. And Cyrus and Tricia, you both kind of teed up. On this podcast, we've been talking a lot about architecture. We started a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about the fact that as data continues to grow, I can't just continue to back it up in the same old way I've been doing it forever, right? And now we introduce things that are maybe critical to the mission of the business. We want to move to cloud. And that changes kind of our architecture. And now we want to think about backing up to the cloud. Are we running applications in the cloud? So as we're thinking about architecturally, what are some of the considerations, Tricia, you think people ought to be considering for the different aspects of what they're trying to accomplish when it comes to running in the cloud?
The first and foremost is performance. If you need a certain service level agreement on performance for restores and for disaster recovery, are you going to be able to get that from the cloud? And then the second one after that comes into the architecture of cost. What is it going to cost you to put that data out there, to store that data out in the cloud, and to retrieve the data from the cloud? And then the third piece that I see as really critical is vendor lock-in. If I go to a cloud solution, what are my future options?
Right. And
yeah, those are important. Oh, sorry, Steve. Those are those are critical considerations, and it's, I think if you look at any architectural exercise or any kind of a transformational project or initiative, you always have to factor in kind of the price performance equation at every level. And I think where, and vendor lock-in as well, I think where this one is a little bit unique from my perspective as not a data protection subject matter expert like my panel members here, is that the performance, the RTO, RPO is very unique here because there is a very explicit and measurable and concrete cost associated with, you know, the speed with which you can back your data up, and more importantly, the speed with which you can retrieve it and recover it, which plays right into the whole kind of cyber response story. Under those circumstances, rapid recovery is absolutely mission critical, like an existential requirement. So I think that's where this is very unique compared to some other more general architectural discussions.
One piece I missed is the cost of human, you know, one of the alerts of the cloud is you don't have to pay right away for that administrator to be, for instance, managing on-site tapes or on-site servers. So that's kind of part of the give and take there when we look at the cost.
Yeah. So Cyrus, maybe as, because you're kind of in the thick of this every day, if I'm a client and I'm thinking about doing backup to the cloud, tell me some of the advantages of maybe picking a particular workload and leveraging the cloud for that. What are some of the advantages for that?
Yeah, I'd say cost advantages are kind of always, you know, front and center. All right, there are perceived cost advantages. There is a big push to leverage cloud object storage these days. You know, in the past, cloud object storage was just not performant enough to give, you know, sufficient RTOs. That has changed. So cloud object storage, you know, if set up properly, it can actually give a very good RTO. It can provide very good RTOs. So cloud object storage has come a long way, and that opened up a lot of use cases for us, which is having, you know, a backup solution, data protection solution sitting on-prem, but sending data to the cloud into cloud object storage and storing it there. Of course, there's another use case, which is running the actual backup server in the cloud itself and leveraging cloud object storage in the cloud. And of course, there is also running applications in the cloud, running your backup servers in the cloud as well. So we have that case as well. So I think to answer your question, I mean, it's cost, right? It's always cost. We can now, you know, with the rise of cloud object storage as being a valid target, we have now use cases that open up, you know, a lower cost data protection solution using cloud object storage.
So just one more drill down on that, Cyrus. At the beginning, you said there's a perceived cost savings, and we kind of came back to cost. Again, if I'm a user, right, and I'm trying to fill out my form to my executive or to my boss to say, here's how we're going to save money in going to the cloud. How do I think about that cost savings when it comes to those specific delivery components? Whether is it cheaper to store things in the cloud? Is it cheaper to run things in the cloud if it's my backup server? How should I think about those?
I think what you really need to do is look at a period. So typically in managed services, what we do when we provide managed services, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, we always look at, and we typically look at a 5-year time horizon. So we look at 5 years. How much is it going to cost me? And there's CapEx and OpEx as always. So even in pure cloud scenarios, there are upfront costs that I have to take into consideration. So we look over this. We always look. We look at this over a 5-year period, and then we kind of break it down to a monthly cost, and then we compare. what we find in certain cases that a cloud is, in the long run, there are significant costs to run things in the cloud, even though the individual terabyte that you store might be might be low in price. But if you really look at the whole picture as a complete, we look at it from a managed service perspective. If you look at everything, then costs do add up even in the cloud. And then we do a cost comparison and then look at how much is it per month, and what we've seen, like for example, Amazon does in fact charge for not only for storing data but also for pulling data out. So and that cost is sometimes forgotten, right? It's like, okay, it only cost me a couple of cents per terabyte, but if you look at the whole picture, well, they also charge for pulling data out, and that's actually significant.
Backups are cheap, but recoveries are really expensive, right?
Exactly.
I think what Cyrus said there is really important, because a lot of times the cloud side of this, the positioning of the cloud side of this, will use the operational expense versus the capital expense to kind of sell people on the argument that cloud is cheap, right? And the reality is, as Cyrus just said, maybe initially it is cheaper, right? Because it's operational expense that you're going to pay down the road. But if you look at it over a 5-year period, it may turn out to be even more expensive than doing the capital expense up front.
Yeah, so I want to challenge that thought of just looking at it for 5 years. I know when you set up the architecture and the cost, you've got to pick some period, but 5 years in the world of data retention and archive is actually very short, because a lot of this data is going to be retained for a lot longer.
So let's maybe take a different approach, right? Let's talk about, we talked about what are the benefits, right, to consider when moving to the cloud. But what are some of the drawbacks? And Sean, since you like to be our negative Nelly here, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the drawbacks? And when I think of this, right, so far in a lot of these podcasts, we've positioned performance, RPO and RTO, cost, pretty much as the gating factors. But what other things should I be thinking about?
Ooh, man, I'm a nattering nabob of negativism, as Spiro Agnew used to say, huh? Vendor lock-in, right? I mean, that's the first thing that pops to mind, right? Once they got your data, whoever they happen to be, right? Good luck getting it out of there, because there's likely going to be a huge project and a lot of costs associated with that. That's number one. Number two, predictability, right? I mean, Cyrus kind of made it sound a little easy to predict these 5-year costs and come up with this monthly number, right? But I assure you, the people on his team and himself have a very complex methodology for coming up with these numbers. And even they, with all their experience, might have difficulty predicting that, because one of the things that vendors love to do is come up with these very obtuse formulas for charging, right? And they are very difficult to understand and very difficult to predict, right?
Yeah, we have in fact. So when we, for example, come out with a new fully managed service offering, what we do is we actually go through a full-blown project to just determine the cost, and we actually go into every line item, right? What's the hardware that we need that we still might need, or if you don't have hardware, you don't have hardware. What's the software? What's this? What we call steady state. For us, monitoring the service, making sure it's up and running, and so forth. So, and it actually, these bills of materials are really really comprehensive. Yeah, but I mean, coming back to this vendor lock-in, that what I think what differentiates the data protection use case, so to speak, and I'm meaning it broad now, including archiving, like what Tricia did, right? Really, what's unique about this that we don't see with other applications and databases is that you have to keep your data sometimes for data retention purposes for like 10 years. And that's when you get this, vendor lock-in when you go to the cloud, because moving them from one cloud to another is actually very resource intensive and expensive. So, if you look like, running applications in the cloud, like an SAP or like a database, like an, Oracle DB2, whatever you have, it's kind of easier. It's easier to switch. It's easier to switch from, let's say, one cloud to another. So there's a lot of flexibility that the cloud brings. But when you talk about these data protection use cases, actually there is this uniqueness, which means I got to keep my data for 10 years, maybe in some cases even forever. And that's what I think differentiates the data protection arena from other applications that you might run in a cloud.
But if you take a hybrid approach and we look at not just on premise, but also a actual on premise type of application, type of cause device or on-premise cloud, that's going to address a lot of these issues that came up. And I don't think we've talked enough about how you could utilize on-premise cloud instead of a third-party vendor cloud.
Give us an example there, Tricia.
So for instance, if you did have a cause device on site, then first of all, you know your bandwidth because it's right there. You know the cost up front because you've bought that appliance. You vendor locked yourself into, just like if you bought drives or something else, or a tape drive, because it's sitting in your IT center. Yes, you're now having to manage that, so that cost is going to go up for you. But a lot of the other performance issues you're reducing, but you're still getting the benefit that these cloud capacities and the cloud protocols have.
That is a good way to look at this hybrid management system. So, Randy, I actually had a question for you. We've been doing a lot of work with the Red Hat team and containerization and kind of the cloudifying of a lot of the applications that are coming. We've recently kind of introduced the ability to protect applications in the cloud with Spectrum Protect Plus. I'm wondering what you're hearing specifically from both maybe the Red Hat team and what they're hearing from their clients around data protection of these new applications that are born in the cloud.
Yeah, it's a great question, and the answer is there's a lot of uncertainty around it because frankly, some of the data services and data protection, and being a primary example, within these large scale container and microservices environments, they're not fully realized or fully developed, right? So a lot of organizations, a lot of customers are kind of rolling their own environments, building out their own architectures from open source frameworks and a number of open source products and some commercial and hardened solutions as well. The interoperability in that environment is complicated, and it gets more complicated as you scale it up. So what we're hearing, and what we're hearing also from the Red Hat team, is that they're really looking forward to a day when, robust data protection and data management services, whether it's protection, recovery, reuse, as part of a NIST framework discussion around cyber resiliency at the container native level, is a critical success factor. And we're pushing obviously very aggressively into that space. So I think as a corporation, I think we have a good story to tell and we have a good vision, but we still have some work to do to get there. So I think we need to make sure we tell that story in the right context and with the right, language. But we obviously, have made a $34 billion bet on the growth and, sustainability of the container market, and data protection is an absolutely critical part of that. So, I know you and your teams have collectively been working on, the next generation data protection implementations for containers. I remember a demo that Tricia did in, I don't know, it's been so long since I traveled, I can't remember where we were, Prague, I think. So
we were in Prague, yeah.
Was it? Yeah, it was Prague, right?
Yeah.
Prague.
So I know that we're moving aggressively in that direction, and obviously the combined IBM and Red Hat machine will, get there hopefully before anyone else does, with a solution that's robust and scalable and cost effective and kind of hits all the points that we've talked about so far.
One of the big takeaways I heard from you, Randy, on that is definitely a person, and maybe this is a great topic for a future podcast, the person who's now responsible and accountable for making sure my data is protected or the data is protected is not necessarily the backup administrator any longer, right? And I think that's something maybe later on down the line we should really dive into, because I think it's important to make sure that we know that as we talk to the folks that are acquiring the protection of data products, what are their needs and who are they servicing, right? And are they sure they're meeting the needs of that group, right?
Yeah, I mean, and we've definitely seen that, DevOps and CI/CD have really transformed the roles and responsibilities of people that are delivering these services. And you're right. I mean, there probably is not likely to be a dedicated, backup administrator for some of these large container and microservices and even serverless environments. So it's a good point.
Yeah. Just wanted to throw in a customer example to what Tricia said, right? It just, Tricia, it triggered, you triggered a memory for me to come up with a customer example and about this on-prem IBM Cloud Object Storage a solution. And what we did is, so we have a customer and they wanted cyber incident recovery from us. So we said, sure, we have a cyber incident recovery solution for you. And we talked about a thing called the clean room. And the clean room is really about that, after you get attacked, that you recover the data into a clean room first to make sure that the malware doesn't spread back into production. So you kind of, the design or the architecture we have with our clean room is an isolated architecture. So it's network isolated. You bring data into the clean room, and then you make sure it's good, it's clean. You run malware scanning in the clean room. And one of the requirements for the clean room really is that it's network isolated, that nobody can get into it, and that specifically malware cannot get out. So that one customer wanted to have a clean room. We said, sure, we can put that clean room in the IBM cloud. And the customer said, wait a second, if it's in the IBM cloud, if it's in a public cloud, there is always access to that clean room, because by definition it sits in the cloud. You cannot really isolate that. So so that was a concern, and we answered the concern with actually running the IBM Cloud Object Storage appliance on premise. So we gave them Cloud Object Storage, but we decided for that reason that we cannot isolate the clean room in a public cloud. For that reason, we actually put it back on prem, and solve the requirement. And there were also concerns about, well, where is the data really stored? Because the customer was in a country of the EU, and the EU kind of prohibits storing sensitive data across GDPR across country boundaries. So it had to be in the country, and it had to be isolated. The clean room had to be isolated, and that would really drove us to in this particular case kind of prefer an on-prem use case over a public cloud use case.
That's a great use case, Cyrus. Thanks for sharing that. So let's do this. Let's wrap up. And Tricia, Sean, and Cyrus, I want to ask you give your parting thoughts on a few things you want to make sure that you consider when thinking about moving your moving components of your environment of data protection to the cloud. What are some of the things you would think about, Tricia?
So building off of Cyrus's piece, I think disaster recovery, it's not just things are really, really bad, whether it's a complete power outage here in California, whether it's an earthquake that's hitting not just your company, but lots of companies, lots of internet providers, cloud providers. Then the question comes, where is your data you need to recover and bring back your system, and what kind of network you have? And I think this is a thought you've got to play in, and maybe yet another case like Cyrus's example for an on-premise recovery strategy that complements perhaps some type of cloud strategy and other aspects. So I think it really is hybrid.
John?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I think it's just, I'd just say again, you need to really sit down, as Cyrus indicated, and do some thinking about the use cases that make sense for the cloud. Kind of go beyond the marketing, right? And what you should be doing, and really kind of understand the use cases that you're trying to address, the costs for those use cases, and how using the cloud long term addresses those. And if you do that, I mean, I think you'll find a lot of cases where the cloud makes great sense and potentially saves you money and improves your efficiency. And you may find some other cases where the marketing is perhaps a little bit ahead of where it needs to be.
Overhyped.
Or where you want to be.
Yeah. I couldn't have said it nicer. So you kind of stole my thunder there, Sean. So I perfectly said, Sean. That's, that's what I would have said. So 100% agree. And that the one thing I think we touched upon was long term, right? If you look at these use cases, also keep in mind, how long do I need to keep the data? Is it really something I want to keep forever? Is it something that can go away after 5 years? That is, I think, an important thought. And I want to close with a promotion for IBM, right? Our strength is that we as IBM can support you at every step of the way. We can support use cases like a true hybrid use case that other vendors on the market cannot, because they might be 100% bought into public cloud. So IBM is, in my mind, the only vendor on planet Earth who can actually support every step of the way to the journey to the cloud and support the use cases that you need to run your business effectively.
Yeah, but Steve, you've been asking all the questions. What is your thought?
My thought is I definitely think it comes down to architecture. I think in today's day and age, with the way that that data centers are now divided up between, I say legacy, but that doesn't mean bad. Older applications that kind of are the true blue, tried and true applications that just aren't going to move, to the virtual infrastructure that's kind of taken on is now the workhorse, let's say, of the environment, to these new born on the cloud applications. There are now segments within the data center. And I don't necessarily believe that one solution per se and one set of processes, the way I used to always do it for these older applications, is necessarily the right way for everything. So my approach when I think about talking to clients is more, have you thought about how to maybe segment your environment to be able to meet your SLAs, meet your cost requirements, which means cost means I may have some application I need to back up and get data back really quickly. So that might be a really expensive backup solution set on-prem, to some data that needs to be stored long-term, and where do I get the biggest bang for my buck doing that, right? And I think it's okay to have, in fact, it's more than okay to have a mix. I think it's almost necessary today, because I don't think there is one solution or one product on the market that can solve all that. That's how I think about
it. I would second that. I mean, it always comes down to architecture, which everybody said, and the right tool for the job. And I think, going back to something Cyrus said, and I think Sean said as well, the advantage we bring as IBM is that we have the broadest portfolio of materials that can be used to develop that ideal solution to fit all of those different requirements. So we don't, yes, we have to, combat vendor lock-in, but we also are all open standards based, especially in the containerization environment. So I think we're uniquely positioned to deliver on that promise of an open architecture that's adaptable, flexible, and fulfills all those requirements with the right tool for the job.
Cyrus, I want to thank you for being our guest on our Spectrum Cast podcast. I really appreciate your time here today.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much. Pleasure talking to you. This was wonderful.
Very.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for Cyrus. We'll have you back in the future as well. Good stuff.
Yes. So on our next episode, we're going to talk about something that is near and dear to everyone's heart, especially at IBM. We're going to talk about tape, and specifically how it plays a part into kind of this notion we've talked about today around long-term retention and cost savings and that sort of thing, as well as, cloud versus tape versus, where am I storing things? So stay tuned. We look forward to hearing from you, and thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time.
Let's meet some linear media. Thanks, everybody.